Las Vegas, June 1963, was a city that never truly slept. It only pretended to rest between illusions. Even after midnight, the strip still shimmered like a living thing, its neon arteries pulsing through the desert darkness, promising escape, indulgence, and dreams to anyone willing to believe. Inside the Sands Hotel, applause still echoed faintly through velvet hallways, as if the walls themselves were reluctant to let go of the music. Dean Martin had just finished another sold-out performance. His voice had wrapped 1,200 people in warmth, humor, and nostalgia. Everybody Loves Somebody had risen like a hymn from the stage, and the crowd had answered with thunder. He smiled, bowed, waved. To them he was effortless charm, a man untouched by worry. But as Dean stepped backstage, the weight of the tuxedo felt heavier than usual, and something in the air felt wrong, as though the building itself were holding its breath. The corridor outside his dressing room was dim, lit by a single buzzing bulb that cast long shadows along the carpet. Crew members had already drifted away. The rat-pack laughter that usually spilled through these halls after a show was absent. Dean reached into his pocket for his key, humming under his breath, still riding the warmth of the crowd. He unlocked the door and pushed it open. He stopped. Someone was sitting inside. Not on the couch, not by the mirror, but in Dean Martin's own chair behind his dressing table, one leg crossed over the other, calmly pouring whiskey into Dean's glass as if he owned the room. The man did not look up. "Close the door, Dean," the stranger said quietly. The voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the kind of certainty that made refusal feel foolish. Dean slowly shut the door behind him. The soft click of the latch sounded far too final. Only then did the man lift his eyes. Salvatore Morano was not built like the men who threw punches. He was built like the men who ordered them. His suit was perfect. His hair was immaculate. His expression was empty of warmth. In Las Vegas, everyone knew the type, but very few ever found them sitting uninvited in their private rooms. "Sam," Dean said, forcing steadiness into his voice, "didn't know I had company." Sam swirled the whiskey. "Sit down. I've had a long show. If you need something, say it." Sam placed the glass down harder than necessary. "Sit down." Dean studied him for a moment. Then slowly he pulled out a chair and sat. Two men, one famous, one powerful, and in that small room fame meant nothing. "I've brought you an opportunity," Sam said. "Next week some important guests are coming in from Chicago. They want a private evening, something special. You, your friends, a night to remember." Dean leaned back. "We don't do private shows." Sam smiled faintly. "You will." "The schedule's full. Frank's filming, Sammy's on tour." "I didn't ask about schedules." Dean felt irritation rise. He also felt something colder beneath it. "We don't sing on command." Sam leaned forward slightly. "Everyone in this city works with someone, Dean. The smart ones choose not to pretend otherwise." Dean shook his head. "Not like this." Silence spread between them, thick and deliberate. "What did you say?" Sam asked. "I said no." The word sounded small in the room, but it did not disappear. Sam stood. "Be careful," he said softly. "Las Vegas is a city of opportunities and consequences." Dean stood too. "Is that a threat?" Sam reached into his jacket and set an envelope on the table. "Open it." Dean hesitated, then did. Inside were photographs. Children walking out of a school gate, two small figures in the sun, a familiar driveway, a familiar front yard, a boy laughing, a little girl tying her shoe. Dean's hands began to tremble. "You have a beautiful family," Sam said. "A man should protect what he's been blessed with." Dean looked up, anger rising fast now. "You stay away from my children." Sam's eyes remained calm. "I'd hate for this city to become unsafe for them." Sam walked past him and opened the door. "Monday night," he said without turning around, 10 o'clock. The door closed. Dean did not move. He stared at the photographs long after Sam had gone until the faces blurred. In that moment, he wasn't a star. He wasn't a legend. He was a father. And for the first time in his career, the applause outside meant nothing at all. Jean was waiting in the suite when he returned. She saw his face before he spoke. "Dean," she said, "what's wrong?" He set the photographs on the table. She picked one up, then another. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God." "They followed them," Dean said quietly. "Someone followed our children." Jean's eyes filled. "Who?" Someone who doesn't hear the word no. She grabbed his arm. We go to the police. Dean shook his head. This city eats policemen. Then we leave tonight. And spend the rest of our lives running. Jean looked at him, desperate. Then what do we do? Dean walked to the window. Vegas burned below them in light. He had spent years learning its rhythms, its smiles, its shadows. And he knew something most audiences never did. Vegas didn't reward courage. It tested it. I'm making a call, he said. At 3:12 a.m., Dean Martin stepped into a street-side phone booth 2 blocks from the hotel. Not the lobby, not his room. He dialed from memory. It rang twice. Hello, a familiar voice answered, thick with sleep. Frank, Dean said, it's me. A pause. Dino, what's wrong? I need you now. 25 minutes later, Frank Sinatra slid into a booth across from him at a closed diner. Dean didn't waste time. He showed him the photographs. He told him everything. Frank's jaw tightened. He didn't speak until Dean finished. Once you bend, Frank said finally, you don't straighten again. I know. Then you're already in a fight. Dean stared at his coffee, and I don't know how to fight this one. Frank was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, there's someone else who should know. Who? Frank looked at him steadily. John. John Wayne did not live in Las Vegas. He did not belong to it, and that was exactly why he mattered. When Dean arrived at the private house outside Lowe's Angels the next evening, he felt something he had not felt in weeks, the strange relief of solid ground. Wayne opened the door himself. No assistance, no ceremony, just a tall man in a simple shirt framed by lamplight. You don't show up unannounced unless it's bad, Wayne said. Dean nodded. They sat in the living room. Dean laid the photographs out. He told the story from the beginning. He did not dramatize it. He did not soften it. John Wayne listened without interrupting. When Dean finished, the room was silent. Wayne finally spoke. No man gets to bring children into a war. Dean looked up. And anyone who does, Wayne continued, stops being powerful. They become desperate. What does that change? Dean asked. It means they can be stopped. Dean swallowed. By who? Wayne leaned back, eyes steady, voice low. By men who don't live off fear. Outside, the California night was calm. But for the first time since the dressing room door had closed behind him, Dean Martin felt something new settle into his chest. Not relief. Resolve. Because this was no longer about a show. This was about a line that had been crossed. And men like John Wayne did not step into situations like this unless they intended to finish them. The house outside Lowe's Angels was quiet in the way only places far from the strip could be. No neon, no music bleeding through walls, no sense that someone unseen was always listening. Dean had forgotten what that kind of silence felt like. It pressed gently against his ears as he sat across from John Wayne, who had not moved since Dean finished speaking. Wayne's expression was not anger. It was something older, steadier, carved by years of wars both public and private. When he finally stood, he did not pace. He did not raise his voice. He simply walked to the window and looked out into the dark hills as if measuring something invisible. Men like the one you described, Wayne said at last, survive because most people spend their lives pretending they don't exist. They build their power on secrecy, on the belief that everyone is too afraid to look directly at them. The moment you stop pretending, the balance shifts. Dean watched him, feeling the weight of those words. I didn't come here to ask you to scare anyone, Dean said. I came because I don't know how to protect my children from something that doesn't play by rules. Wayne turned back to him. Then you came for the right reason. Fear can't protect a family, but structure can, discipline can, and loyalty can. You're not dealing with a ghost. You're dealing with a system. Systems can be studied, and when they're studied, they can be weakened. He walked back to the chair and sat. First, he continued, your children disappear from his world, not in fear, in strength. Within hours, Wayne had activated a network Dean had never seen and never spoken of publicly. Not law enforcement, not mob connections, not Hollywood handlers, men who had worked security for diplomats, men who had escorted witnesses, men who specialized not in confrontation but in invisibility. Dean's family was moved without spectacle. New routines, new vehicles, new faces that blended into old environments. His children still went to school. They still played. They still laughed, but every sidewalk now had eyes that were not obvious. Every street had vehicles that did not linger. Every phone call was routed through people who understood how to listen without being heard. Jean cried when she realized what was happening, not from terror, but from the strange relief of knowing someone else had taken weight from Dean's shoulders. That night, when Dean watched his children sleep, he understood for the first time how thin the line had been between illusion and catastrophe. Fame had always felt like armor. He now saw it for what it truly was, light that attracted attention, not protection. The next stage, Wayne explained, was not to confront Salvatore Morano and not to provoke him. Men who live by intimidation don't lose when they're challenged, Wayne said. They lose when the ground beneath them becomes uncertain, when they stop knowing who sees what they do, when they stop trusting the rooms they sit in. Wayne introduced Dean to a man named Caldwell, a former intelligence coordinator who spoke rarely and never wasted words. Caldwell did not speak of threats. He spoke of patterns. He laid out Sam Morano's movements, his known business fronts, his associates, and most importantly, his vulnerabilities. Casinos that were already under quiet observation, financial connections that depended on staying unnoticed, relationships with higher powers that survived only as long as they were not embarrassed. Caldwell did not promise outcomes, he promised pressure. The objective, he said, is not punishment. The objective is behavior change. Dean listened, absorbing the strangeness of hearing his life discussed in terms usually reserved for political operations. He realized something unsettling and empowering at the same time. Sam Morano had always assumed Dean was alone. He had mistaken popularity for isolation. He had mistaken charm for weakness. On Friday night, Dean returned to the Sands for his regular performance. The show was flawless, the crowd was electric, but behind the laughter a different theater had begun. New faces stood near exits. New ushers who were not ushers watched hands more than tickets. Dean sang, joked, smiled, and inside he counted minutes, not songs. He understood now that real confrontations did not announce themselves. They unfolded quietly in offices, in phone lines, in movements that seemed random until they were. After the show, Dean went to his dressing room alone. He did not lock the door. He wanted the room to feel unchanged. He wanted Sam to believe the first threat had done its work, and for a moment doubt whispered in him. Doubt that he had made the situation worse. Doubt that power, once engaged, always demanded escalation. But then his phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, detached. "Your family's perimeter was tested tonight," the voice said. "Nothing serious. A car slowed near the school. It didn't stop. It won't return." Dean closed his eyes. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means," the voice replied, "that someone wanted to see if the door was still open. It is." The following afternoon, something unusual happened at one of Morano's business offices. Two separate inspectors arrived within 20 minutes of each other, from departments that rarely overlapped, asking questions that did not accuse but did not comfort either. That same evening, a trusted intermediary of Morano's found his overseas accounts temporarily frozen pending routine review. No charges, no headlines, just friction. The kind that slows momentum. The kind that makes phones ring behind closed doors. By Sunday, Morano was no longer sitting comfortably in his main office. He was moving, changing locations, asking who knew what, asking who had spoken. He had built his control on being unseen. Now he felt watched, not threatened. Watched, and that was worse. Dean learned of this through Wayne, who kept him informed without flooding him. "You don't need to know the mechanics," Wayne said. "You need to know the direction, and the direction is away from your family." Dean wanted to feel satisfaction. Instead, he felt sober. Because with every shift in Morano's behavior, the danger sharpened before it softened. Pressure did not weaken a system immediately. It forced it to reveal itself first. And systems, when they feel exposed, often make mistakes. On Sunday night, Dean received a call that did not come through his usual channels. He recognized the voice immediately. "You've made things complicated," Sam Morano said. "Vegas doesn't like complicated." Dean's pulse slowed rather than raced. That alone told him how far he had already moved from the man in the dressing room days earlier. "You shouldn't be calling me," Dean replied. Sam laughed faintly. "You think someone is protecting you?" he asked. "Everyone has protectors. They don't all last." Dean did not raise his voice. "My children are not part of your world," he said. "They never were. You crossed a line that doesn't belong to any business." Sam was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. "Lines," he said, "exist only if everyone agrees they do." Dean answered steadily. "Then you should ask yourself why things are already changing." The call ended without goodbye. That night, Dean sat alone in his suite, lights off, looking out at the Strip. He thought about how many years he had sung about love, humor, longing, and easy joy, and how little he had ever sung about fear. He realized that fear was not dramatic. It did not crash like cymbals. It crept like dust, And courage, real courage, did not roar, it organized. It endured. It refused to allow children to become leverage. He felt John Wayne's presence even from miles away, not as a celebrity, but as something rarer in Hollywood. A man who believed lines existed even when they were expensive to defend. By Monday morning, Dean knew something had shifted permanently, not in Vegas, in himself. He was no longer waiting for a threat to finish. He was watching a system struggle to adapt, and in that struggle he understood the truth of power revealed itself, not in who could frighten whom, but in who could no longer sleep easily. And for the first time since that backstage door had closed, Dean Martin slept for 3 uninterrupted hours. It was not peace, but it was no longer helplessness. It was the stillness before an answer. If you're ready, I will continue with part 3, where the unseen pressure turns into a decisive psychological confrontation. Morano's control begins to collapse, and Dean faces the moment where he must choose whether to remain a performer or become something far more dangerous to those who use fear as currency. By Tuesday morning, Las Vegas no longer felt like a city to Dean Martin. It felt like a machine that had begun to rattle from the inside. The lights were still bright, the laughter still loud, the marquees still promised impossible happiness, but something beneath the surface rhythm had changed. Dean could feel it even before he was told. The calls that once arrived casually now came coded, spaced, filtered. The quiet men assigned to his family reported not incidents, but absences. Streets where familiar cars no longer passed. Unknown faces that appeared once and were never seen again. The pressure around Sam Morano's world was not exploding. It was thinning, and thinning was dangerous because it forced hidden structures into motion. When organizations that survive on fear begin to lose their certainty, they do not always retreat. Sometimes they reach. John Wayne flew in that afternoon without publicity. He did not go to the sands. He did not call ahead. He met Dean in a rented house miles from the Strip, one that smelled faintly of dust and new paint and nothing else. Wayne's presence had always carried a weight that could fill a room without sound. That day it carried something more focused. He sat across from Dean, his hat on the table, his hands folded loosely, his gaze steady. "Morano's network is testing every wall around him," Wayne said. "When walls don't answer, men don't feel powerful, they feel exposed." Dean leaned back, absorbing the tone more than the words. "Is that good or bad?" he asked. Wayne did not answer immediately. "It means," he said finally, "that what happens next will define whether this ends quietly or stains everything it touches." Dean understood what he meant. There were still many ways for this to turn reckless. There were still men in Sam Morano's orbit who had not yet felt the consequences of being watched. The system had not collapsed. It had only begun to recognize that it was no longer invisible. Caldwell arrived later with updates that sounded less like reports and more like weather changes. Financial channels closing without explanation. 2 minor partners withdrawing suddenly from long-standing arrangements. A planned gathering canceled at the last minute due to unforeseen complications. Caldwell did not smile when he spoke of these things. "You're witnessing something most people never do," he said. "A pressure environment. This is what power looks like when it realizes it has boundaries." Dean found himself thinking of the night Sam Morano had sat in his chair, so certain of himself, so comfortable in another man's space. That certainty was now evaporating in rooms Dean would never see. "Will he stop?" Dean asked. Caldwell met his eyes. "Men don't stop because they're asked," he said. "They stop when continuing becomes more dangerous than changing." That night Dean returned to the sands for what was supposed to be a routine appearance. He performed as always, but the rhythm behind the curtain was not routine. More unfamiliar faces, more subtle movement. The audience saw a singer. The people watching the people saw a board shifting pieces. Dean had not told Frank Sinatra the full extent of what had unfolded. Frank knew enough. He knew when to speak less and observe more. After the show, Frank joined Dean briefly in the dressing room. He looked around, noticing what most would miss. "You all right, Dino?" he asked quietly. Dean nodded. "I'm standing," he said. Frank studied him, then clapped him once on the shoulder and left without ceremony. It was the kind of gesture men shared when words were unnecessary. The call came after midnight. This time it was not Sam. It was someone lower, closer to the street, someone whose voice carried more nerves than command. "Mr. Martin," the man said, "I was asked to tell you something. There's confusion right now. People don't understand what's happening." Dean closed his eyes, listening not to the message but to the cracks in the messenger. "What were you asked to tell me?" he replied. The man hesitated. "That you should call him, that maybe things were." Misunderstood. Dean felt the weight of the moment settle. This was not surrender, it was uncertainty. And uncertainty was the first honest emotion Sam Morano's world had shown since this began. There was no misunderstanding, Dean said calmly. There was a line, the man exhaled. I'll tell him you said that. The call ended. Wayne was not surprised when Dean told him. When the middle layers start reaching out, he said, it means the top is no longer certain his own voice is enough. He walked to the window, watching the city. He will want a meeting, not to threaten, to measure. Dean did not like the sound of that. And if he asks, Wayne turned. Then we decide whether silence or presence serves you better. Dean understood the implication. The story was no longer simply about defense. It was about conclusion. About shaping the end before it shaped him. The request arrived the next afternoon. A private conversation, neutral ground, no witnesses, no conditions other than discretion. Dean sat at the kitchen table of the rented house with the message written on a slip of paper before him. He had not yet answered. Jean had called earlier. The children were fine. Their routines had begun to normalize again. Laughter had returned to their voices. That sound grounded him more than any strategy ever could. When he hung up, he remained seated for a long time. Wayne watched him without intrusion. Finally, Dean spoke. If I don't meet him, Dean said, he may continue to feel trapped, and trapped men don't choose quietly. Wayne nodded. And if you do meet him, he said, you don't go to negotiate, you go to redefine. Dean lifted his eyes. Redefine what? Wayne's gaze was steady. What happens when someone touches your family? The meeting was set for the following evening at a closed restaurant off the Strip, a place that once hosted celebrities and now hosted only silence. Caldwell's people secured the perimeter long before either man arrived. The building looked abandoned. Inside, it was lit only enough to show the table. Dean arrived first. He did not bring friends. He did not bring threats. He brought the weight of everything that had happened since that door had closed days earlier. When Sam Morano entered, he did not carry the same ease he once had. His suit was still perfect, but his eyes were not. They scanned the room, they measured the quiet, they did not settle comfortably anywhere. Dean, Sam said, sitting across from him, you've made things difficult. Dean did not respond immediately. He studied the man who had once believed a photograph was the ultimate argument. You made things personal, Dean said. Sam's jaw tightened. This city runs on understandings, he said. I offered you one. Dean leaned forward slightly. You tried to buy me with my children, he said. That's not business, that's surrender, and I don't surrender. Sam's gaze hardened. You think you've won something? He asked. Dean's voice did not rise. No, he said. I think you've lost the illusion that no one sees you. The words landed heavier than any insult. Sam leaned back. For the first time since Dean had met him, he looked older, not physically, structurally. You're a singer, Sam said. You live in light. You don't belong in this. Dean did not hesitate. Neither do children, he replied. They sat in silence. It was not theatrical. It was not dramatic. It was the silence of two men realizing that the board had changed. Finally, Sam spoke again, more carefully now. What do you want? He asked. Dean's answer came without calculation. For my name to never be spoken in your world again, he said. For my family to vanish from your awareness. For your people to understand that whatever you believe this city is, it does not include us. Sam studied him, then nodded once, slowly. You don't leave a man many choices, he said. Dean met his eyes. You left yourself those choices, he replied, when you decided to make a father your currency. When Sam Morano stood to leave, he did not offer a threat. He did not offer an apology. He simply said, this never happened. Dean watched him go. He did not know whether the war had ended, but he knew something had shifted permanently, and in that shift he felt not triumph but gravity. Because the cost of protecting what mattered was not glory. It was the acceptance that some victories would never be applauded. They would only be lived. Later that night, Dean returned to the rented house. Wayne was waiting. Dean did not recount the conversation in detail. He did not need to. Wayne read the change in his face. It's not finished, Wayne said. Dean nodded. But it's no longer aimed at my children. Wayne placed a hand on the table. Then whatever happens next, he said, will happen on your terms. Dean exhaled slowly. For the first time since the photographs had touched his hands, he felt something that resembled steadiness, not safety. But ground. And ground was enough to stand on. Weeks that followed did not explode into headlines. There were no scandals, no courtroom dramas, no whispered exposés in entertainment columns. Las Vegas continued to glitter, tourists continued to arrive, and the sands continued to sell out. To anyone watching from the outside, nothing had changed. And that was precisely how Dean Martin knew that everything had. Systems that collapse loudly leave wreckage. Systems that retreat quietly leave space. The calls stopped. The strange vehicles disappeared. The unseen men who had once hovered near his children gradually blended back into ordinary absence. Not because vigilance ended, but because necessity had. When Jean told Dean that the kids had returned to arguing over small things again, over toys and homework and bedtime, he felt something loosen in his chest that he had not realized he had been holding. Fear does not leave all at once. It dissolves in pieces, each ordinary moment reclaiming a small corner of the mind. Dean continued to perform. He continued to smile, but something in him had deepened. The jokes were still easy, the voice still warm, yet beneath the rhythm of entertainment lived a steadier presence. Audiences sensed it without understanding it. There was a weight to his calm now, a groundedness that did not belong to stagecraft. When he sang about love, it no longer felt like romance. It felt like protection. When he joked about foolishness, it no longer felt like escape. It felt like gratitude. John Wayne returned to his own world as quietly as he had entered Dean's. They did not stage farewells. They shared a single dinner, a few words that needed no decoration. "Some fights don't leave scars," Wayne said. "They leave standards." Dean nodded. He knew what he meant. A line had been drawn inside him that no audience would ever see. Caldwell's reports eventually stopped as well, not with declarations but with absence. The environment no longer required monitoring at that level. Morano's name drifted out of certain circles. Certain partnerships restructured. Certain doors no longer opened for him in the same way. It was never announced why. It did not need to be. Power rarely explains itself when it moves away. Dean never heard from Sam Morano again. Not directly, not indirectly, not through anyone else's mouth. In time, Dean heard that Morano had left Vegas. Some said Chicago, some said overseas, some said retirement. Dean did not ask. He had learned that closure did not always arrive as a conversation. Sometimes it arrived as space. One evening, months later, Dean sat alone in his backyard, listening to the soft sounds of his home. A radio murmuring somewhere inside. The faint clink of dishes. The distant laughter of his children. He watched them through the window, arguing over something trivial, something beautiful in its unimportance. That sound carried more meaning than every standing ovation he had ever received. He thought about how close he had come to becoming a man who complied in silence. A man who sang on command because fear had quietly rewritten his values. And he realized something that unsettled him even more than the danger ever had. He realized how easily that could have happened, how quickly people learn to call survival cooperation, how easily they mistake protection for permission. He understood now why men like Sam Morano thrived, not because they were strong, but because they trained others to forget where their own strength lived. Years passed, the world changed. New stars rose, new songs filled radios. Dean aged, his children grew. The story of that summer never appeared in interviews. He never dramatized it. He never hinted at it. Frank never spoke of it either, except once late in life when asked about the darkness behind Vegas. Frank had paused, then said simply, "Some of us learned early that you don't beat the dark by joining it. You beat it by refusing to feed it." Dean had smiled when he heard that. He knew exactly what Frank meant. After Dean's death, when his home was sorted quietly by family, something small was found in a private drawer, an old envelope. Inside, a faded photograph of his children in the early 1960s. On the back, written in his unmistakable hand, were words never meant for an audience. "Some wars are not fought for victory. They are fought so innocence can continue without knowing there was ever a battle." That was all. No dates, no names, no details, just the truth he had lived. History rarely records the moments when power fails. It records the moments when power announces itself. But the truest strength does not need witnesses. It does not require applause. It operates in the quiet decisions where men choose not who they will impress, but who they will protect. Dean Martin was many things to the world. A voice, a smile, a symbol of ease, but to his children, on a summer no one ever sang about, he was something infinitely greater. He was a man who refused to let fear write the rules of their lives. A man who chose uncertainty over submission. A man who discovered that the most dangerous thing to anyone who feeds on intimidation is not anger, not publicity, not even resistance. It is a father who calmly removes his family from their reach and teaches the darkness that not everything in the world is for sale. And that is why, long after the neon faded and the names changed, one truth remained. Some victories never echo, they simply endure.